Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a laser-focused, quick-fire interview on food and the economy with international experts, where we seek answers to questions all of us should be asking. I'm Ajay Jakhar, Chairman Bharat Krishik Samaj of Farmers Forum India, as well as the Vice Chair at Action Track 2, Shift to Sustainable Consumption Patterns at the UN Food Systems Summit. Today, we are delighted to have with us Mr. Fergus Sinclair, Chief Scientist, Center for International Forest Research and World Agroforestry. Thank you, Mr. Sinclair, for joining us today. Agroecology is just not old knowledge, but requires cutting-edge science for us to begin to fully grasp the potential and develop a better understanding. What we see today is that the terminology and the narrative have become confusing for the people, from organic farming, natural farming, agroecological practices, and now nature-positive production. Can you give a broadly differentiate between these for the viewers, please?
Yes, I think there are actually quite important distinctions between these different terms, and it's quite useful to understand what they are. So agroecology is based on 13 principles, and we can go into those perhaps a little bit later. And that means that you get a diversity of practice because those principles are locally applied. Organic agriculture is prescriptive. There are rules that you have to follow, and therefore it's much easier to certify it. And so in terms of marketing, there's an advantage there. But of course, in terms of local adaptability, it's not so good. Now, nature positive or sometimes nature-based solutions are coming actually more from the conservation side. So you can think of agroecology as being farming in harmony with nature, but nature-based solutions are really starting from the premise of conservation and then realizing, well, people have got to do some farming. So you would think that those two things would meet in the middle. But of course, you tend to have different people with different mindsets from different institutions who are coming from the agricultural end or coming from the conservation end. So quite often their intuitions and the sorts of solutions that they're coming up with are a bit different. They have a lot of commonality, some overlap, but there's actually important distinctions between them.
So more specifically on agroecology, you have left agroecology as too broad a concept, which encompasses a wide spectrum of practices flowing out of adoption of a few principles to adoption of all principles. And like you said, organic farming has very clear standards, while it is not true for agroecology. So does not having a minimum bar cause a problem for everyone, arguing that their practice is also agroecology? Everyone seems to be claiming some sort of distinction in what agroecology actually stands for. So how do you exactly nudge people to an ideal state of adopting all the principles that you're talking about?
Well, we have quite an important concept in agroecology, which is of transition and transition pathways. So the ultimate goal is a transformed food system, the whole food system. So that relates to consumption patterns as well as production methods. Adapt and co-create solutions to problems that suit their ecological, cultural, social, and economic context. And there are different approaches to certification. For example, participatory guarantee systems, where you are based more on principles rather than prescribing practice, and you can still say that you are operating in a way that is environmentally sustainable and socially equitable. And that's what we're looking for in terms of agroecological systems. And we can accept the fact that there will be transition. So not every at every moment will products have the same degree of agroecological embeddedness, but that also allows farmers to continue to make money, to make profit while they are in a transition phase. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable aspect, and the diversity of practice is one of the things that we need if we wanted a landscape scale to have resilient food production. So it actually works.
So that's true. One of the arguments against agroecology is that if we were to adopt its principles, maybe we cannot feed the world without increasing the land area. What would you have to say to that?
Well, that's actually nonsense. And it's absolutely clear from a theoretical basis to start with, that if you mix plants, for example, of very different stature, that are getting there in a particular place, then you can get a higher productivity, higher net primary productivity than you would do from a monoculture, which has only got one type of plant, which is trying to get the resources. Obviously, all the plants are getting resources from the same basic space. And that's an evolutionary process called niche diversification. And we talk about niche differentiation when we're deliberately choosing things for a farming system that will use the environment differently, so they'll capture more resources and productivity is higher. Now, it does take more knowledge and quite often more labor in order for those systems to work, but essentially they can be more productive than conventional agricultural approaches. So and there's quite a lot of evidence for particular cases that agroecological systems are as or more productive than conventional ones.
So that's heartening to know. That's really heartening to know. When you look at the worldwide dialogues, we find that they're limiting agriculture practices, valuing agriculture practices to carbon sequestration. Why is this wrong? Because there is a greater link to climate change mitigation. And also, is this part of some corporate capture of the space which so much civil society is worried about?
Well, I think there's been a strong critique of climate smart agriculture. And that's because it's been put forward as a sort of solution to everything in a way. And it's quite interesting because I'm not sure anybody would be interested in climate dumb agriculture. So it's a little bit of a catch-all. But the key argument is whether incremental increase in efficiency of conventional agriculture can address the key problems that our global food system faces, which are catastrophic biodiversity loss, the climate crisis, the fact that we're not feeding people properly. We've got 690 million people hungry, and an obesity crisis, and a whole series of sort of micronutrient issues. So the food system isn't working, and a few incremental changes are not going to make the difference. So quite a lot of things that get classified as climate smart agriculture are not really going to contribute. Now, again, there's an overlap between climate smart agriculture and agroecology. Agroecology often does contribute to both mitigating and adapting to climate change. Obviously, where you put trees into agricultural systems, you end up storing much more carbon than you would otherwise. In general, you increase soil carbon because of the focus on soil health within agroecology. And a lot of the practices that agroecology is involved with do confer resilience of the system, diversification itself, for example. And therefore, agroecology does contribute very much to addressing the climate crisis. And I think the issue about, is there a corporate capture? I think actually what we need to do is to be persuading corporates to really think carefully about how the food system operates, the power asymmetry that often exists, and the fact that it's actually in their interests to improve the position of farmers and farm workers within this whole system if they want their businesses to be sustainable and if they want consumers to be happy to purchase the products that are coming from those food systems. So, and we're beginning to see corporates taking that on board. And of course, it means that they need quite often to decentralize their sort of activity and move towards more circular economy approaches, which is a challenge for them because we've had decades of going in the opposite direction. So big challenge, but certainly something very well worth engaging in debate with the corporate sector about.
So, so that's nice. Obviously, the food systems are broken, and we realize that agroecology is a solution. But why is it not scaling up fast enough? Fast enough. I mean, that's a question. Why aren't we able to get more governments, more people on the same side?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting because things are moving very fast. So you might have heard at the Committee on World Food Security last week, the president of Sri Lanka announced a bold policy initiative to ban the import of agrochemicals on a national basis to create a national agroecological transition. And countries like Senegal, Switzerland, France, there was a representative from Paraguay, all endorsing the concept of agroecological transition. So there is actually a lot going on and a lot of debate, talk, and movement, including some very big and bold initiatives. But there are also things which really constrain agroecological transition. And these include things that lock in an industrial or green revolution agriculture and lock out the more agroecological alternatives. Things like market failures. So you get an immediate return to products, but you don't get a return to maintaining soil carbon in the short term. It doesn't have an immediate monetary value. And so it doesn't get valued as much as it should do. And in general, a lot of sustainability issues are longer term. They're slow variables, and markets are not very good at recognizing and valuing those. So that requires interventions if you want to do something with it. And then there are policies. Now, there are a lot of policies which actually favor industrial agriculture, subsidies for fertilizer or other inputs, for example, legislation that make it difficult for farmers to get benefits from trees that are on their land, and a number of sort of perverse effects of existing policies. And of course, it's possible to develop policies which are actually conducive to agroecology, for example, trying to get the lag between investing in sustainability and getting returns from it. And then there's the issue of complexity. So the fact that there is a really heterogeneity in terms of farmer circumstances, the ecology that they're working in, all of the socioeconomic circumstances, means that what is good for one farmer may be different to the next one. But our whole agricultural research and development system is geared towards looking for silver bullets that get widely disseminated everywhere. Now, if you're going to support local innovation, then you need to address this complexity. And there is now an options by context agronomic paradigm, which does this really well using plan comparisons embedded in development initiatives. And that's really bringing the science and the development process, the farmers together and working as one to look at supporting local innovation rather than the concept of things being discovered somewhere and then spread as a secondary process. And just one last thing is the need for integration. So we've got a real problem about integration horizontally across sectors. So, water, energy, forestry, agriculture, environment are often in different ministries. They've often got different administrations. And you actually need to tackle them together in order to address agroecology. And then there's vertical integration as well. And there's essentially a critical missing middle. And that is the scale of the local landscape, where many ecosystem services are first manifest. And we often don't have either social capital or policy instruments operating at that scale. And that means that it's almost impossible to manage multiple ecosystem services and the trade-offs and synergies amongst them at that local landscape scale.
I also find it's difficult to make bureaucracies and policymakers understand the value of something that is new, that they are not used to. They have difficulty getting out of their comfort zones. And which gets me to the last question: is institutions of farmers, their own agency is one of the key features of the models of agroecology that you are proposing. And what exactly is the agency and institutions building that you're talking about?
Well, this is perhaps the most fundamental issue in agroecology. And we're talking not just about farmers, but about all actors within food systems, consumers as well as producers. And the issue is, to what extent can their preferences for producing food and consuming it in a sustainable and socially equitable way, how can that be effectively worked through the whole system? So at the moment, farmers often find it difficult to choose production methods which suit them. So there are many farmers who are using chemicals that they don't want to use, perhaps. They may feel that they've got health disbenefits as a result of using them, but they're sort of forced into with a cycle of debt and needing to maintain productivity in order to fulfill requirements, and there may be subsidies and all sorts of things that are forcing in that direction. So the agency often requires collective action of one sort or another, because usually as individuals, it's very difficult to change the extent to which you can influence something. If you can get together into larger groups, whether it's women's self-help groups in Andhra Pradesh, or whether it's a farmer cooperative, as a joint group, you may be able to then improve the agency in terms of being able to then define more how you're able to produce. And the same goes for consumers. So whether a consumer can express a preference for food that is sustainably produced depends on the extent to which they know when they're purchasing what they're actually purchasing and how it's being produced in the first place. So that's sort of tracing, tracking element, the connection of consumption and production, and whether they can trust that information, and whether there is a selection available so they can express their preference. So in many cases, people may not have an option to buy agroecologically produced food because it's simply not in the shops. So when we're talking about agency, it's about trying to ensure that all people within a food system are able to influence the way in which their food is produced, processed, stored, transported, and consumed.
And sold.
And sold, indeed.
So, Dr. Sinclair, this is really nice. I think so. You've clarified a lot of points on agroecology and also on agency, because this is a lesser understood subject. And I'm sure viewers will be very enlightened by what you have told us. And I hope it was as easy as you make it sound, but it's a long walk. We all have to walk the long walk. to get where we want to go?
No, it won't be easy because there's a lot of vested interests. You're talking about challenging norms, challenging the status quo. So it is difficult,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. And I think, in terms of what's necessary for this generation and future generations, it is worth putting the effort in to make agroecological transitions a reality.
Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us, and we are really encouraged by your connecting with us, by your views, and we'll reach back to you sometime when we're doing more work on this. Thank you so much, Dr. Sinclair. Thank you so much for joining with us. May I just
Thank
ask you
you.
where? May I just ask you, where are you in the world now? Are you in Africa?
Yeah, I'm in Nairobi.
You're in Nairobi. You're in the heart
And
of
I'm sorry
Africa.
that there might have been a bit of background noise. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's perfectly fine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining with us.
Okay, bye for now.
Have a nice day, sir. Thank you.